Yeah, just as a little aside, really, it's a digression, but it's peripherally connected. When we were looking at the, 1 second here. We were looking at the 10th and 11th Midah in the Yud Gimel Midais, which is Titain Emes Liakov, Chesed Liavram. So again, the Ramak understands that Yaakov is a reference to what you might call ordinary Jews who are noheg with the midah of rachamim. Again, just to remind you, in the language of Kabbalah, rachamim and chesed are not synonymous. Chesed is unrestricted benevolence. Rachamim is tiferes. Rachamim is a balance of gevurah, withholding, and chesed to create the optimal mix. So rachamim is another aspect of tiferes that's also called emes. Tiferes has a lot of different names. There's tiferes, which is beauty. There is Torah. There is emes. There is truth, and there is rachamim. All of these are associated with tiferes because they represent the appropriate balancing of chesed and gevurah. So Yaakovs are the people who are noeg barachamim. In other words, they have chesed for people, but it's balanced with a certain amount of strictness and discipline. So those are called the Yaakovs. And Avrahams represent the people who are unrestricted chesed no matter what. So basically the concept is Hashem will treat the Yaakovs of the world with the midah of emes, which is rachamim. Hashem will treat the Avrahams of the world with the midah of chesed. Okay, so therefore, the more I can become like Avraham Avinu, the more I will be zocheh to the chesed of Hashem, even if I'm undeserving. So, again, I don't have a full answer to the question I raised, but just once again to state what Ramak says, on the emulation standpoint, therefore, he seems to say that you should treat the Yaakovs with emes, and you should treat the Avrahams with chesed, because that's what Hashem does. Just as Hashem treats the Yaakovs with emes. So emes here, once again, just like rachamim and chesed are two different terms, emes also is atypical. Emes does not mean objective factual truth, but emes is the appropriate balance between chesed and gevurah, and therefore emes is synonymous with rachamim. Again, this may be counterintuitive, but that's the vocabulary that we're employing. So therefore, towards the Yaakovs, behave with emes, towards the Avrahams, behave with chesed. Again, the question I raised was, l'chayra, if the Avrahams get a better deal in the world, I should be an Avraham even towards the Yaakovs, right? I mean, that's the problem. What do you mean, towards the Yaakovs, I should be emes? If I'm emes towards the Yaakovs, then I'm being a Yaakov. If I'm being a Yaakov, all I'll get from Hashem is emes. Right? You see, there's a certain problem here. Why would we say be emes towards Yaakov? If I'm emes towards Yaakov, that means I'm behaving with Yaakov. So all I'm going to get is emes, as opposed to if I would be an Avraham, I would get chesed. Okay, that's a difficulty that I don't think we totally worked out. But just as a kitzer, though, the one thing that the Ramak does not discuss here, and it's obvious why he doesn't, because it's not in the pasuk, is although he is mechalek between Yaakov and Avram, he is not mechalek between Yaakov and Yisrael, which is obvious because the pasuk in Micha makes no mention of the name Yisrael. But just to go back a little bit, to talk a little bit about that, I remember that Yaakov's name from birth was, of course, Yaakov, and it's connected to the heel because Yadai Yechazes, he was holding on to the heel of Esav, trying to pull Esav back when Esav was coming out. And Esav later retranslated Yaakov's name. He tricked me, v'yakveni zeh pamayim. He tricked me twice. He took my birthright and he took my bracha, v'yakveni zeh pamayim. But also, Akev means heel, yeah. And as I said before, as the Ramak even says, it connotes the Jewish people when they're not on the highest level of Kedusha. Yisrael was the name that Yaakov got when he struggled with the angel the night before he met Esav. And of course, Chazal tell us that this mysterious man angel is none other than the guardian angel of Esav. And Yaakov had to fight with the angel of Esav in the spirit before he was ready to fight with the Esav of the flesh. And the whole night he's wrestling with this man, this image, this angel. And in the morning, the angel says, "Let me go." And Yaakov says, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And the angel then said, "Your name shall no longer be Yaakov. Your name shall be Yisrael. For you, Sarisa, you have excelled, you have ascended with God, and you have become victorious." So Yisrael is a name of triumph, nitzachon, kind of being elevated by God, as it were. And therefore Yisrael is the name that refers to the Jewish people at their highest level of righteousness. And the Torah does alternate the names Yaakov and Yisrael, and you can usually trace it, that when Yaakov is B'tsar and the Shekhinah is not with him, he's called Yaakov. When he is in a higher madrega of Simcha and Avodah, he is called Yisrael, and the like. So it's very, very interesting that the Chavetz Chaim has two interesting observations about Yaakov's struggle with the angel. And again, it's not really connected to Tomer Devorah, but since it's Yaakov Yisrael, let me talk about it a little bit. The first is, why do we find that it's only Yaakov that struggles with the angel? And we don't find a similar fight between Avram and a Malach, or Yitzchak and a Malach. Why is it only Yaakov that has this particular struggle? So the Chavetz Chaim says the following. We know that Pirkei Avos says, Al shleisha devarim ha'olam omed, the world rests on three pillars: Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim. And we know that each of the Avos represent one of these fundamental pillars. Avraham represents the pillar of loving kindness, Gemilas Chasadim. Yitzchak, who was a korban, represents Avodah, divine service. And Yaakov, who spent 14 years learning in the yeshiva of Shem V'Ever, without sleep before he went to Lavan's house, Yaakov represents Torah. Now this demonic angel force, Esav, really represents the power of Ra in the world, the Yetzer Hara, that which tries to destroy good. So says the Chavetz Chaim, the Yetzer Hara is perfectly willing to let Jews serve God through chesed and avodah. Why is that so? Because the Yetzer Hara is a strategic thinker, meaning the Yetzer Hara will allow people to do good as long as the Yetzer Hara is confident that the goodness is not going to last and it's eventually going to peter out. So the Chavetz Chaim says, even though Pirkei Avos makes it very clear that the world stands on three pillars, so if all you do is learn Torah, that's not enough. You have to have Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim. You need three pillars. Okay, it's very important to recognize that. The Gemara says, anybody who says, all I care about is Torah, doesn't even have Torah. For sure. But nevertheless, Torah is the first among equals. Three pillars, but Torah is the most important of those three pillars. Why would Torah be the most important of those three pillars? Because Torah will bring you to Gemilas Chesed and Tefillah, because I learned Torah. I absorb the learning of Torah. Serve Hashem, do Chesed. But the other things are not going to bring you to Torah necessarily. You could daven all day, you can do Chesed all day. You're not going to understand the Tosfos or the Ramban or whatever it would be. So Torah can bring you to the other two in a way that the other two are not going to bring you to Torah. And that's why the Chavetz Chaim says Torah is the most important of the three pillars. So the Yetzer Hara is not going to bother Avraham. Let the Jews do Chesed. The Yetzer Hara is not going to bother Yitzchak. Let the Jews daven. Because the Yetzer Hara knows that a Yiddishkeit that is based primarily or exclusively on chesed or tefillah, avodah, is not going to have intergenerational continuity. It's not going to have nitzchias. So the Yetzer Hara says, let them do mitzvahs today, I'll get them tomorrow. But Yaakov Avinu, who represents the koyach of Torah, that worries the Yetzer Hara because Torah has intergenerational continuity. Meaning through Torah they'll come to everything and it's going to go from one generation to another generation. So that the Sarah Shel Esav needs to attack you.
If the Yetzer Hara isn't attacking us when we're doing avoda, why do we need the Sir HaMishtalech? It seems like the explanation you were given was so that we can do the avoda properly.
Yes, so here's the point. I mean, certainly the Yetzer Hara does attack us in Chesed and Avodah as well, but only when we've incorporated Torah, meaning once we live lives in which we learn Torah, then everything is up for attack. But when your Avodah was primarily Chesed or Avodah based. Now, the truth of the matter is, the Chavetz Chaim was not talking about America, but in many, many ways, the Chavetz Chaim's analysis is quite accurate with respect to the historical progression of Judaism in the United States, maybe other countries as well. I know the United States more. That is, the first major waves. I mean, there have been Jews since George Washington and before. There's always been Jews around, and even some synagogues. But the first big immigration of Jews took place in the mid-19th century. And those Jews were primarily of German descent. In fact, a lot of them became quite wealthy. Goldman Sachs, all of the investment bankers, these were these German Jews who came all the way back in the 19th century. Some before the Civil War, some right after the Civil War. Now, those Jews were largely Reform Jews. They came to this country, they were not Shomer Mitzvos, but they were very much into what you might call chesed. They created a lot of benevolent societies. They created a lot of Jewish hospitals. Today, a Jewish hospital, at least in America, is kind of superfluous. Every hospital will serve everybody, but there was a time in which Jews needed, Jewish hospitals, Mount Sinai, etc. So they created Jewish hospitals. They created country clubs, which on some level were chesed societies where people can get together. They created fraternal lodges. So you could actually say wave one of Jewish immigration in America was primarily based on chesed. Chesed. Not mitzvahs, but chesed. What happened was, basically, the children and descendants of that group largely either intermarried or absolutely converted to Christianity, because since Judaism was not an important part of their lives, I'm overgeneralizing, many of them became Christian, many of them became Seventh-day Adventists, for example, because they didn't want any religion at all, but they wanted something that would make minimal demands just to be accepted in society. So that's an example of the chesed having no staying power, meaning chesed did not allow future generations to become Jewish. The next wave of immigration was in the late 19th century, the 1890s, before World War I, and after World War I as well, and they were primarily immigrants from Poland, from Eastern Europe. Poland, Hungary, and the like. Now there, the demographic was very different. Many of them were actually many of them were religious. And of course, there's a whole conflict. There are books written about this, a tremendous conflict between the first wave of immigration, who were wealthy, well-educated, secular German Jews, and the second wave, which were largely poor, shabby, beggars, Polish Jews, called Ostjuden, East Jews, etc. And the German successful class were very embarrassed by the poverty and lack of secular education of the Polish. But they were and they started a lot of shtibels, even some beautiful shells with stained glass windows and everything else. But there were kemat no yeshivos. For whatever reason, they did not really start yeshivos. They did not start the concept of day schools. There were chadarim. They did what they could. And there too, what eventually happened was, so we could actually describe first generation immigration was chesed. Second generation of immigration was avodah, shuls. But once again, most of their children, the lost generation, the Jewish community that was born in America between World War I and World War II, largely, once again, became assimilated. Very, very, very few people remained Orthodox of that generation. Part of it, Rav Moshe Feinstein said, was that the old saying, "It's schwer zu sein a Yid," it's hard to be a Jew. And in those days, it was hard to be a Jew. If you didn't go to work on Saturday, you'd have to find a new job every Monday. And there was so much sacrifice. And the new generation that was born in a free country and wasn't facing in those days the anti-Semitism and the discrimination. At some point they thought, why do I have to live a hard life? Why can't I just be part of the culture? And that's what they did. So the truth of the matter is, the growth of the frum, of the Orthodox community in the United States, is essentially a post-World War II phenomenon. When you had Gedolim like Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Aaron Kotler, Rav Shraga Feivel-Mendlovich, who spearheaded the starting of hundreds of day schools throughout the United States, Jewish education, yeshiva high schools, more advanced yeshivas, later kollalim, community kollalim. Now granted, most of American Jewry is not frum to this day, but still, the notion that frum, is growing and is successful and is matzliach and is vibrant and it's capable of producing generations came only with the introduction of Torah learning. So the Chavetz Chaim's prediction was 100% correct. A Yiddishkeit that's based on Torah education has a continuity. A Yiddishkeit that is not based on Torah education may be vibrant for a short time because it may take up other mitzvahs and the like, but ultimately it has no staying power. It's not going to go on. And that's why the Chavetz Chaim says, to go back to his vort, why the Malach only attacks Yaakov Avinu, that represents Torah, and the Malach does not attack Avram and Yitzchak, that represents Gemilas Chasadim and Avodah.
The second generation that came from Europe, in order for them to have lasted, they must have had a tradition of learning Torah. So when they came and started these shtivos, why didn't they teach Torah and have classes in yeshiva?
Yeah, so it's a very very complicated question. Keep in mind that we sometimes romanticize Eastern Europe. We think in Poland, every shoemaker knew Shas, everybody was learning all day. The truth of the matter is, there were actually many Amaratzim in Europe as well. But what's interesting was that even if you were an Amars, even if you were not a learned person, there was a concept that you would learn some Torah every day. In fact, there's a somewhat of a pejorative expression in Yiddish, which is really not pejorative, but it's taken pejorative. A certain Jew might be dismissed as, oh, you're an Ein Yaakov Jew. An Ein Yaakov Yid. Now, what is an Ein Yaakov Yid? It's usually said kind of condescendingly. Ein Yaakov, as you know from other shiurim we had, Ein Yaakov is a compendium of all of the Agadata in the Gemara, meaning that in the 1500s, Rav Yaakov ibn Chaviv took the Agadatas from the Gemara, from the Talmud Bavli, and separated them out from the Gemara and printed them separately. And in subsequent editions, many commentaries were added. The Rashi on it, the Tosos on it, the Marsha on it, which is in the Gemara itself, and then many other commentaries that were written specially for the Agadata. Now, Agadata is, in a deepest level, very, very deep. Very, very deep. Agadata is not child's play. But on a superficial level, Agadata is stories. Agadata is a simpler learning on a superficial level than it would be the halachic portions. So as a result, in Eastern Europe, it was customary for people who were not very learned and they couldn't really follow involved Gemaras or the like, that there would be like a shir in Ein Yaakov between Mincha and Mariv for the common folk, who would be able to absorb the stories of the Gemara, the Musar, the Midos. Remember, God is not just stories, it also teaches you Midos and Musar and the like. So the phrase for a simple, good-hearted Jew who was not scholarly was, he's an Ein Yaakov Yid. In truth, that was originally a term of endearment, a term of affection. And it did mean that even a Jew who was very, very uneducated would try to, have some type of Torah learning, Chumash or Ein Yaakov or something like that. Thank you. So the truth is, many of the people who came to America were not learned, really. They were Ein Yaakov Yidden, but because of their lack of learning, they didn't have a lot that they could transmit to their children. That was one idea. Now, another thing that's pretty surprising, though, is, okay, so on one hand, we have this idea of the poor immigrant who was not very learned, and he did the best that he could, but he really didn't have enough Torah to give over to his children and the like. But then there's an opposite phenomenon that's quite astounding. You can actually find great Rabbanim who came to America. People who could have been Gedolim in Europe. One was in Omaha, Nebraska, crazy places, South Dakota. Unusual place, Fall River, Massachusetts, even my own city, Hartford, Connecticut, had Rabbanim at one time, 1905 or whatever it is, who were kind of, Gedolim in America. And here we get into a very fascinating psychological dynamic. Many of them were so despondent at what they saw in the emptiness and decadence of American culture that they literally gave up hope. They basically said, there's nothing we can do here. We could build yeshivos in Vilna and in Minsk and in Brisk, but you just can't do it here. Meaning they kind of gave up. It's very, very tragic. And of course what happened was giving up became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you give up and you believe there's nothing you can do, then you do nothing and nothing happens. The godless of what Rav Aaron Kotler and the like was, they refused to concede. You see, this is where memory, I'm getting a little digressing, but this is, I think, an interesting point. This is where memory and nostalgia can sometimes be your enemy rather than your friend. You have a picture in your mind of what Torah was like in Europe, either before World War I or before World War II. And you see the richness of the learning and the yeshivas. And then you come to a desert that's so barren and so empty. And you think to yourself, we could never do that here. So we don't do it. It's not possible. I'm not going to make, Fall River, Massachusetts, Vilna, or even New York City, Vilna. But that's where memory can be your trap. Because you have to understand that your goal is not, I have to make New York City Vilna. I have to make New York City whatever I can make New York City to be. You see? In other words, you can't have this image. I mean, this is what Voltaire said, that the enemy of the better is the best. You've heard that saying. That means sometimes I have this idea that if it's not perfect, why bother? That's not true. If it's not going to be Vilna, I'll make it half Vilna. Half Vilna is better than no Vilna. You see? And that's the problem. So you really had to answer your question, really. There were two different dynamics going on in opposite ways. One was that even good religious people just didn't have the Torah knowledge. Those who came to America in particular were often not learned. And therefore they were Ein Yaakov Yidden who had a good heart, but they weren't able to convey a lot of Torah to their kids. And the other was the opposite, that some of the few people who were very, very great were literally broken. They were broken-hearted, so to speak, in thinking there's nothing you can do in this midbar. And that's where Rav Aaron came in, and that really came in after... people have to understand Rav Aaron's role. Rav Aaron Kotler, we sometimes think, Rav Aaron Kotler founded a big yeshiva. Well, in his life it was a small yeshiva, a yeshiva in Lakewood. It's much more than that. It's not just he founded a yeshiva. He brought a certain hashkafa to America that you can plant Torah here as well. And another person who was very instrumental in this, so I'm going to be an equal opportunity person, was the Frierdiker Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe before Rav Menachem Mendel, his father-in-law of Yosef Yitzchak. The first thing he said when he got off the boat in America, he says, America is nicht anders. America is not going to be different. What we did there, we can do here. Although, I'm saying it wouldn't necessarily be exactly the same, but it can be done. You're not miyayish. You don't give up. And the truth of the matter is, now once again, I mean, most Jews in America are not religious. That's still the case. But on the other hand, we have to admit that there is vibrancy, there is growth, there is a lot of power. I don't mean political power, but a lot of spiritual power and energy in the frum communities. There are many yeshivas, there are community kollel, Orthodox shuls, whether it's modern or Haredi, whatever you want to call it. But that energy came when Jewish society shifted from its primary emphasis on chesed and avoda, and it shifted towards building Talmud Torah. That's why day schools were crucially very, very important in the building of Yiddishkeit. Not just building of Torah, obviously, but the building of Yiddishkeit in America. And because it is Limud HaTorah that creates intergenerational continuity. Now, this is so true. This is so true that even the Reform movement itself acknowledges this as a principle, although they address it in a distorted way. For many, many years, the Reform movement was absolutely against a day school concept. A day school meaning half the day you study Jewish subjects and the other half, secular subjects, because they felt that a Jew in America is supposed to go to the public school system and just absorb, American culture that way, and Jewish education should be a Sunday school thing. Right? That was the Reform position for most of its history. Over the past 30, 40 years, although a majority of Reform still, if they have any Jewish education, it's a Sunday school thing, but they actually have they've established day schools. They've recognized that Sunday school does not give enough of an educational Jewish experience. We have to have kind of a daily program of Jewish instruction. So you have the paradox of Reform day schools. Now, not that many, and a majority parents don't go there because they cost a lot of money, number one. But at least in theory, the Reform movement itself acknowledged that Jewish continuity requires intensive Jewish education. I will just say, though, that the establishment of a Reform day school, and I also include conservative day schools like Salman Schechter, is kind of a mixed blessing. I mean, let me give you an example from my own experience. I went to an Orthodox day school in Connecticut, but most of my class were not Shomer Shabbos, because when I was growing up, the only day schools that existed were Orthodox day schools. There was no such thing as a conservative day school or a Reform day school. They didn't exist. So if you were a parent who wanted your child to have a good Jewish education, even if you weren't religious, but you cared about Jewish education, you had to send them to an Orthodox day school because that was the only show in town. Now, as a result, conservative Reform kids, at least some of them, were getting Torah education. Now, what later happened was, when the conservative movement recognized that this intensive Jewish education was a good thing, so they started their own day schools, and these are called Salman Schechter day schools. And there are actually quite a lot of them throughout the United States. And then later, the Reform movement started their day schools. There aren't that many, but they also went along with the concept, abandoning their insistence on public education. But what that actually means is, you see the problem. The downside is that now, if you have, let's say, traditionally minded conservative or Reform parents who want their kids to have a Jewish education, they no longer have to choose the Orthodox school. They can choose the conservative or the Reform school. So as a result, kids who might have been exposed to genuine Torah get exposed to things that are not genuine Torah. So the notion that a conservative day school, Reform day school, is a good idea is kind of a mixed bag. It might be, although you can even debate that, it might be a good idea for the kids who would otherwise go to public school, although the truth is you could even debate that. But it does mean that a certain percentage that would have gone to Orthodox day schools were pulled away, and that is to their detriment. Okay, so it's a complicated question, but the point I'm making is a simple point, that the Chafetz Chaim's observation that intergenerational continuity of Jewish identity requires some type of Torah education, some type, even the conservative and reform movements, in principle, are moda to that, although what they're giving may not be Torah, but at least in principle, they're moda to this particular idea. Yeah.
But don't Chesed and Avoda set the basis for Torah, and then if that's true, that is like a fair premise, why doesn't the evil inclination think like, oh, he sees Avoda and Chesed, it's like, I see where this is going. This is what's going to allow Torah to take root. Why doesn't he try to put it off to them?
Well, I think, as I said before, that may be exactly the situation today, where we have Torah as our end goal, but in the days of Avraham and Yitzchak, that was not yet there, and in American society, it was not yet there. As I say, there literally weren't yeshivos, and the people were not pushing for yeshivos in those days. Now I know, well, some of you might have grandparents who were Orthodox Jews, in 1920, and there were some. I don't mean to say that nobody was frum in that generation, but there were actually very, very few. And many people thought, including some great rabbis, that Orthodoxy was going to die. Orthodoxy was going to die in America as soon as these European immigrants died. They didn't see any hope. It was a very difficult realization. People who were chashuva people who were great people, they literally thought they were the last generation, at least in the United States, Western countries, and the like. Paradoxically, therefore, it was the aftermath of the Holocaust, where it looked like we lost everybody, that generated the hope that there could be renewal. A very, very amazing thing. The renewal came b'dafka after the Holocaust, in particular. Yeah.
I understand the difference between Yaakov and Yisrael. Does Yeshurun factor into?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Yeshurun is yet a third name of Yaakov Avinu. Yeshurun means the upright one. And here the Netziv writes in the Hakdama to Hamik Devorah that Yeshurun refers very, very specifically to Bein Adam Lechavero, where there is Achdus and Avas Yisrael. And his proof is a very good proof. When Moshe Rabbeinu uses the word Yeshurun in Zos HaBracha, he says, Vayihi bishurun melech. There will be a melech, meaning God will have his kingdom in Yeshurun when? B'hisasef, this is in Zos HaBracha, B'hisasef Rashei Am, when the heads of the people come together, Yachad, in unity, Shiftei Yisrael, the tribes of Israel. This is also a chasna song, right? Vayihi b'shurun melech, right? So it's sung at weddings. But the Netziv says Yeshurun is a remez to Achdus and Avas Yisrael. So that's a separate category that's imposed. In fact, the Chassam Sofer says very, very beautifully, do you remember a famous story in Kedushin which talks about Kibbud Aviyim, and it uses a non-Jew as an exemplar of Kibbud Aviyim, Dama ben Nesina. And it mentions that one time one of the stones, one of the jewels in the Choshen was lost, and they had to replace it, and Dama ben Nesina had that exact jewel that they needed, and the problem was the key to the jewelry case was under his father's pillow. His father was sleeping, and he refused to wake up his father to retrieve the key, and as a result, they had to go elsewhere for the jewel, and he lost the deal because of Kibbud Aviyim. And as a reward, Hashem gave him a para aduma next year, which he could sell for the same amount of money as the jewel. So the Gemara says the following: the particular jewel. By the way, that is, I don't want to get into too many digressions. That itself is an amazing story, because what would your father think? I mean, Dama ben Nesina is praised because he was willing to give up, let's say, a multi-million-dollar deal not to wake up his father. So what would be if it happened to you and Dad wakes up and you say, Dad, I want you to know, Abba, how much I respect you, how much I honor you, how much I love you. We were offered $10 million for a jewel, but I wouldn't wake you up. Now, is your father going to be happy or gratified? Or is he going to think, you're nuts? What type of idiot son are you? Now, here's the thing. So some Mefarshim actually learned that Dama ben Asina did a stupid thing. He didn't do the right thing. Halachically, if you know that your father wants to be woken up, you wake him up. So Chazal are not using him as a precedent for how you should behave, but we're using it as a precedent for how devoted he was. Yes, his devotion was misplaced, but the fact that he was willing to give up for kibbud aviyim, in other words, it's really testifying as to his heart, not to his action. His action may have been illogical. Say goy shakaf, whatever. His action was an illogical thing, but it shows his devotion. Okay, but be it as it may, the Gemara adds a certain detail to the story. It actually tells you which stone was lost. It was the stone of the tribe of Binyamin. Yashva is translated as a diamond, but the stone of Binyamin was lost. Now, you need to have a little background of the stones of the Choshen. On the stones of the Choshen were engraved the names of the Shvatim, Ruvain, Shimon, and each stone had a shevet. But in addition, it spelled out Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Shiftei Yeshurun, the tribes of Yeshurun. The way it works is, and you can draw the picture yourself, each stone had 6 letters on it. So let's say stone number 1 had Ruvain. So how many letters is Ruvain? Reish, Aleph, it's 5 letters. So it had Ruvain and Aleph for Avram. The second stone was Shimon, which is also 5 letters. So it had the Beis of Avram. The third stone was Levi, which is 3 letters. So it had the Reish, Hey, Mem of Avram. You see how it worked? In other words, you're going to spell out Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, adding it to the tribes so that each stone has 6 letters. Now, what that means, though, is that by the time you get to the last, so you spelled out all the 12 tribes, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, but on Binyamin's stone, there was more than 6 letters because it said Binyamin, and it said Shiftei Yeshurun, the tribes that are upright. So the Chassam Sofer says a very beautiful idea. You know why Binyamin's stone was lost? Because Binyamin's stone had the word Yeshurun on it. And Yeshurun is the name we give to Klal Yisrael when they are unified and righteous and upright. The second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed eventually because of sinas chinam, polarization. So they understood that they lost the stone of Yeshurun as a siman min hashamayim, that they had the sin of sinas chinam. In fact, with this, the Chassam Sofer wants to be miyashev a very shver Rambam. When the Rambam describes what was inscribed on the last stone, he does not say Shiftei Yeshurun, he says Shiftei Ka, Yud Hey. So the Chassam Sofer asks, how can the Rambam say Shiftei Ka? The Gemara says Shiftei Yeshurun. So says the Chassam Sofer in ingenious teretz. It said Shiftei Yeshurun, but when they lost the stone of Binyamin, they understood they were no longer worthy of the Madrega of Yeshurun. So on the replacement stone, they said Shiftei Ka, we're the tribes of God, but we can no longer say we're the tribes of Yeshurun. Now, what's the Rambam's makar? I don't know. I mean, how did the Rambam know that? But the Chassam Sofer says, logically, Shiftei Ka is what they wrote after they lost, or not wrote, what they engraved after they lost the stone of Binyamin. So that's my answer to the unusual connotation of the word Yeshurun. Yeah.
What's the guy that didn't wake up his father? What's his name?
Dama ben Nesina. He lived in Ashkelon. Ashkelon now, unfortunately, is a city that's going through a lot of bombs, although Baruch Hashem, there hasn't been too much damage, yeah.
Can I ask just a general question about your comment that you don't know how the Rambam knew this Shiftei Ka thing?
Yeah.
I remember that you told us that we would not be able to understand the Gemara at all today if it wasn't for Rashi.
For Rashi, yes, for
And
sure.
Rashi and Rambam were almost contemporaries.
Yep.
And I understood that what Rashi is a compendium that he made of all the notes that he took in his yeshivot and some of his own putting it together. But Rambam came from a completely different derech halimud.
Yep.
He had his own, whatever his sources were
Yep.
in the Sephardic land.
Yep,
So
that's
wouldn't
correct.
it be that it's a similar thing as the Rashi, just he was learning from different Rebbeim who had different portions of
Oh
the
yeah,
Torah?
when I said that without Rashi, we would have no idea what the Gemara means. I mean, we would have no idea. I mean, there were people who understood the Gemara without Rashi. I mean, there were Gaonim before Rashi who understood the Gemara. Rabbeinu Gershom, Rabbeinu Hananel, whose commentaries are even printed in the Gemara, predated Rashi. And you're correct, the Rambam had different Masoras. So big machlokas. Was Rambam aware of? Well, Rashi was almost surely not aware of the Rambam because Rashi was older. There are some indicators Rashi was aware of the Rambam. Others say he was not even aware of Rashi at all. I'm sorry, that the Rambam was aware of Rashi. So you're correct, there was another Messiah, but all I'm saying is, as a matter of literary output, we don't have a comparable commentary that takes you line by line by line. I mean, if you look at the Ritva, you look at the Rashba, you look at the Rishonim, they don't explain every single phrase of the Gemara. So Rashi was very, very unique in virtually every single phrase. And Rashi was also unique in his style. It's quite amazing. To this day, it's quite amazing how you could be so brief and so clear at the same time. Rashi is very brief, really economy of expression, and yet it's so, I mean, Rashi's hard, I mean, Gemara is hard, but in terms of clarity, there's nothing like Rashi that takes you through it. So that we don't have. Now, obviously, what we do with the Rambam is we do reverse engineering, meaning to say the following. We don't have a commentary of the Rambam on Shas. We have his conclusions. His conclusions are the Mishnah Torah. So you do reverse engineering, you try to figure out how the Rambam must have understood the Gemara to come out where he came out. Because a lot of times where he comes out does not fit where you would come out according to Rashi, and it does not fit where you would come out according to Tosfos. So the Rambam must have had another interpretation of the Gemara, which he didn't give us because the Rambam doesn't interpret Gemara directly. So one of the advanced things that you try to do when you learn Rambam is you try to go backwards and figure out how he learned Pshat in the Gemara to come out where he came out, because we don't have a Parish. Although it's interesting, I think we do have a fragmentary Parish of the Rambam on Maseches Rosh Hashanah. We actually do have a little bit of a commentary on Gemara, but only on part of Maseches Rosh Hashanah.
There's nobody else from the Sephardic Masorah who passed down more of the detailed knowledge?
Well, yeah, sure. You have Rav Meir Halevi, the Ramah, and then you have the later Rishonim, the Rashba, the Ramban, the Rashba, the Ritva, the Ran. They're all from Spain. But the line by line by line by line, you generally don't have. Right? So Rashi is kind of unique in that, yeah.
I may be mistaken, but isn't the Rambam commentator in Gemara and Nedarim, or is that the Rashbam?
No, in Nedarim it's the Ran.
So maybe
In Nedarim, the Ran wrote a commentary because the Rashi and Nedarim is not from Rashi. The Ran wrote a commentary, the main commentary in Maseches Nedarim, but the Ran is different. The Ran is a combination of Rashi and Tosfos in the sense that he does.
I know Rashi had passed away in the middle of writing the Baba Basra, maybe it was?
Yeah. Oh, so then that's the Rashbam, his grandson. That's his grandson. The Rashbam is Rashi. Rashi did not have sons. Rashi had daughters. But Rashi's grandsons were very, very great. The Rashbam is the older brother of Rabbeinu Tam. The Rashbam is Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, and Rabbeinu Tam is Rabbi Yaakov ben Meir. Right? So Rashbam and Rabbeinu Tam are brothers. But if you look at the Rashbam's commentary, you can see that it takes him 3 times the words of Rashi. So you can almost see, and in fact, in Arvei Psachim you actually have a controlled experiment. In Bava Basra you don't, because Rashi stops and the Rashbam continues. But in Arvei Psachim, for some reason I don't know, you actually have both Rashi and the Rashbam. You actually have both commentaries on the same dafim. I'm not sure why that was the case. And there you can literally see it. You can see Rashi will say something in 5 words, and the Rashbam will say something in 40 words. I mean, that's kind of the ratio. So you can see the difference in expression. And Bava Basra, you don't have the controlled experiment because there's either Rashi in some dafim or the Rashbam. Okay, so that's the word of the Chafetz Chaim, going back to why the Malach only fights Torah, does not fight Chesed and Avodah. Okay, we'll stop here.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome Ech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.